Whole Story Quest Audiobooks presents A Dedicated Friend by Shirley Longford, narrated by Walter Chidlow and W.M., featuring a tape recording of a young W.M. and Estelle, including an additional introduction from Charlie Higson.
Introduction to the Eden Book Society by Sir Charles Higson. I'm appalled to realise that I was at school half a century ago. Yes, I became a teenager in the 1970s. Back then, the genre of young adult fiction hadn't yet been invented. Kids would go straight from reading the likes of Roald Dahl, C.S. Lewis and Enid Blyton to adult fiction. And horror, alongside fantasy and sci-fi, was one of the classic gateway genres to the world of proper, grown-up books. Horror stories deal with very adult subject matter: death, disease, aging, change, sex, anxiety, madness, dismemberment, but through a filter of fantasy that makes it more palatable for teenagers. The early 70s was a golden era for horror and the occult, or should I say a dark and sinister era. We had Stephen King, James Herbert, The Exorcist, and there were cheap paperback collections of horror stories from publishers like Pan and Mayflower, keen to cash in on the trend. Old Victorian ghost stories were repackaged alongside newly commissioned pieces. They were perfect for us teenage boys, as they contained reliable levels of sex and violence, as the lurid covers made perfectly clear. And we passed them around, the page corners turned down to indicate the juicy bits. My school library had a small horror section that I began to work my way through, mostly the classics, Edgar Allan Poe, Mary Shelley, Bram Stoker, but also a few more modern works. There was one book I left till last, not because I wanted to properly savour it, but because it had never looked that inviting. In fact, it looked positively boring. A faded green hardback from the 1930s, with small print and no illustration on the cover of rats, maggots, eyeballs, bloody claws, or semi-naked succubi. But having exhausted all other possibilities, one wet afternoon I took it out. This was my introduction to the Eden Book Society. To my shame, I can't remember exactly which title it was. As I say, it was a long time ago. I think it must have been either The Mind's Eye by Robert Hanson Maines or Pale Shadow by Emily Warrender, both of which I read at the time.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?